My parents handed my $80,000 college fund to my older sister 15 years ago. They looked me in the eye and said she was the smart one. They called her the investment that would actually pay off. I spent the next 15 years working triple shifts, scrubbing floors, and building a financial risk analysis firm from nothing. Yesterday, my sister walked into a glass boardroom on the 40th floor of a high-rise. She was seeking a $2 million bailout for her sinking real estate venture. She had no idea the shadow CEO she was scheduled to pitch to was the same sister she robbed. When she realized who held her financial survival in their hands, she did not apologize. She sent me a text threatening to destroy my company. What she did not know was that I had already built the perfect trap. I am Harper. I am 33 years old and the CEO of Aegis Financial. Before I tell you how I legally dismantled my own family, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch the golden child get everything while you fought for scraps. The air conditioning in the boardroom hummed a low, steady rhythm. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, my hands resting flat on the polished wood. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline stretched out a grid of concrete and glass. The heavy wooden door clicked open. My executive assistant stepped aside, allowing the applicant to enter. Vanessa wore a tailored cream suit that cost more than my first car. Her hair fell in flawless waves. She carried a designer leather portfolio projecting the image of a successful real estate mogul. She walked in with her chin raised, expecting to charm a room full of anonymous corporate investors. Then her eyes landed on me. The color vanished from her cheeks. Her confident stride faltered, her heels scraping awkwardly against the hardwood floor. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her grip on the leather portfolio tightened until her knuckles turned bone white. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, struggling to process the reality of the room. The last time she saw me, I was packing a duffel bag to leave our parents' house broke and discarded. Now I was wearing a tailored charcoal blazer, sitting in the executive chair of the firm that held her financial lifeline. "Hello, Vanessa," I said. My voice was level, devoid of any warmth or surprise. "Have a seat. We have a $2 million proposal to review." She lowered herself into the chair opposite me. Her breathing was shallow. "Are you the CEO of Aegis?" she asked, her voice cracking. I opened the file she had submitted earlier that week. The paperwork detailed a desperate plea to inject capital into her failing commercial property fund. I flipped to the financials section. My mind flashed back 15 years. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table holding my acceptance letter to a top-tier university. I remembered my father Richard sliding a bank statement across the table. "We are transferring the college savings to Vanessa," he had said, not even looking at my face. "Her startup idea needs seed money. You are resourceful, Harper. You will find a way." I did find a way. I built an empire. Vanessa built a house of cards that was currently collapsing under the weight of her own incompetence. I looked up from the dossier, meeting her panicked gaze. "Go ahead and pitch, partner," I instructed. "Tell me why I should fund your venture." Vanessa stumbled through her presentation. She mixed up her revenue projections. She avoided making eye contact. She sounded like a student giving a book report on a novel she had never read. I did not interrupt. I just watched her unravel, letting the silence in the room suffocate her rehearsed lies. When she finished, she practically ran out of the boardroom, leaving her presentation materials scattered across the mahogany table. I sat alone in the quiet room, organizing the paperwork. My phone vibrated against the wood. The screen illuminated with a new message from Vanessa. I read the text. It did not contain an apology or a plea for mercy. It was an ultimatum. "You are going to approve that $2 million loan," the message read. "If you deny my application, I am going straight to the local business journal. I will tell the press that Aegis Financial is running an illegal tax evasion scheme. I will drag your firm through the mud until your investors pull every cent. Do not test me, Harper." I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. She thought she was holding a gun to my head. She had no idea she had just handed me the ammunition I needed to start a war. I did not reply to Vanessa. A response implies a negotiation, and you do not negotiate with extortionists. I captured a screenshot of her threat, uploaded it to my encrypted cloud drive, and deleted the notification from my screen. I picked up the leather portfolio she had abandoned on the mahogany table and walked out of the boardroom. I navigated the glass corridors of Aegis Financial, heading straight for the forensic accounting division. I needed someone who could dissect financial lies with surgical precision. I needed Marcus. Marcus is the director of forensic auditing at my firm. He is an African-American man with a brilliant analytical mind, possessing an uncanny ability to spot a forged ledger from across a room. He is also my brother-in-law. My older brother David had the good sense to walk away from our toxic parents 12 years ago. David married Marcus, and I gained the most relentless financial investigator on the Eastern Seaboard. I entered his office and dropped the portfolio onto his desk. Marcus did not flinch. He looked at the embossed logo on the leather cover, then up at me. "My sister wants a $2 million commercial loan," I stated, keeping my voice level. "She tried to blackmail me to guarantee the approval. Tear this application apart. Find every hidden fracture." Marcus opened the file. "Give me 4 hours." I returned to my office and handled my afternoon conference calls, my mind operating on dual tracks. At exactly 3 o'clock, my desk phone buzzed. Marcus told me to come down to his office. When I stepped into his workspace, the atmosphere was dense with focus. 3 monitors illuminated his desk, displaying spreadsheets, tax filings, and property deeds. Marcus leaned back in his ergonomic chair, removing his reading glasses. "Your sister is not running a real estate fund." Marcus began, his tone clinical and detached. "She is running a sinking ship, and she is using buckets of fraudulent data to bail out the water." He pointed to the center monitor. "I ran a cross-analysis on her submitted tax returns against federal property databases," he explained. "Vanessa claimed steady rental income from 3 commercial strip malls over the last 5 years. The problem is, she sold 2 of those properties 36 months ago. She has been booking phantom revenue. She inflated her asset valuations by 40%, fabricated depreciation schedules, and hid a severe liquidity crisis behind a network of shell corporations." I stared at the glowing numbers. It was a textbook case of wire fraud. If any traditional bank had processed this application, she would be facing federal indictment within a year. "The loan application is garbage," I said, crossing my arms. "We decline it, report the fraudulent data to the credit bureaus, and let her sink." Marcus did not nod. He picked up a separate stack of papers from his desk. "The financial fraud is not the most alarming part of this portfolio, Harper. You need to look at the collateral. In commercial lending, a $2 million loan requires substantial hard assets to secure the debt. If the borrower defaults, the lender seizes the collateral to recoup the loss." I took the documents from Marcus. "Vanessa did not pledge her own properties," Marcus stated quietly. "She pledged a residential deed." I read the address printed on the legal filing. My breath hitched. It was a 5-bedroom colonial house situated in an affluent suburb of Chicago. It was the house I grew up in. It was the property owned by my parents, Richard and Patricia. I flipped to the signature page. There, in stark black ink, were the signatures of my mother and father. They had legally authorized a lien against their primary residence to serve as the collateral for Vanessa. They signed away their house for her. I whispered, the sheer audacity of the betrayal washing over me. Marcus watched me carefully. 15 years ago, they drained your college fund to finance her initial startup. Now they are wagering their retirement sanctuary to save her from bankruptcy. They are willing to lose everything to maintain the illusion of her success. The realization crystallized in my mind. Richard and Patricia had placed their own heads on the chopping block. They had handed Aegis Financial the legal right to foreclose on their home the moment Vanessa inevitably defaulted on the loan. "If we reject the application, Vanessa goes under tomorrow," Marcus summarized. "But if you approve it knowing her financials are fabricated, she will default within a quarter. When she does, Aegis will legally absorb your parents' estate." I looked at the signatures again. The sting of their 15-year-old betrayal flared in my chest, rapidly cooling into a calculated strategy. They had offered me the ultimate leverage on a silver platter. I did not need to break the law to ruin them. I just needed to let them execute their own terrible ideas. "I am going to approve the loan," I said, handing the collateral documents back to Marcus. "But I am going to restructure the covenants, draft a new contract." Before I could outline the trap, I intended to set the intercom on Marcus' desk buzzed. It was my executive assistant. "Harper," she said, her voice laced with confusion. "There is a gentleman at the front reception desk. He refuses to leave. He says he has legal documents requiring your immediate personal signature, a process server." I left Marcus' office and walked briskly down the hallway toward the glass-enclosed lobby. A man in a beige windbreaker stood near the reception counter, holding a thick, sealed envelope. He spotted me approaching, verified my face against a photo on his phone, and stepped forward. "Harper," he asked. "Yes," I answered. "You have been served." He pressed the envelope into my hands, turned on his heel, and walked out the glass doors toward the elevators. I stood in the center of the lobby, the heavy envelope resting in my palms. I broke the seal and pulled out the legal filing. The document bore the official stamp of the state superior court. It was not a standard lawsuit. It was an emergency ex parte injunction. I scanned the plaintiff line, Richard and Patricia. My parents were suing me. I read the dense legal text, my pulse remaining steady, as the true nature of their assault revealed itself. Richard and Patricia had filed a motion to place an immediate hard freeze on all of my personal bank accounts, my investment portfolios, and my executive compensation packages at Aegis Financial. I read their justification for the asset freeze. The words on the page defied logic. The plaintiffs claimed that 15 years ago, they provided an $80,000 capital investment to fund the creation of my financial risk analysis firm. They argued that this initial seed money granted them a foundational equity stake in my current empire. They were demanding an immediate halt to all my financial transactions pending a corporate ownership trial. The sheer, unadulterated fiction of the claim was staggering. 15 years ago, they stole my $80,000 college fund and handed it directly to Vanessa. I had worked 3 grueling jobs to pay for my own education. I built Aegis Financial from zero, utilizing microloans and relentless labor. My parents had never contributed a single dime to my survival, let alone my business. Yet they had walked into a courtroom and committed perjury. They twisted their theft into a fabricated investment. I realized their strategy instantly. They knew Vanessa financial records were fraudulent. They knew I possessed the power to deny her $2 million loan and expose her crimes to the authorities. They filed this emergency injunction to choke my personal finances and threaten my position as CEO. It was a coordinated 2-pronged attack. Vanessa used blackmail. Richard and Patricia used the judicial system. They intended to hold my assets hostage until I capitulated and released the $2 million to Vanessa. I gripped the court order standing in the bright sunlight filtering through the lobby windows. They believed an injunction would incite panic. They thought freezing my accounts would force me to surrender my company to save myself. They viewed me as the same helpless teenager they had discarded 15 years ago. They did not understand that dragging me into a legal arena was a fatal miscalculation. I walked back toward the executive wing, the court document in my hand. I was not going to play defense. I was going to use their fraudulent lawsuit to uncover a much darker secret hidden within their favored son-in-law finances. I did not call my corporate counsel. I did not summon my executive team to draft a crisis management protocol. When family members orchestrate a direct strike on your livelihood involving intermediaries, only signals weakness. I bypassed my office, rode the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage, and slid into the driver's seat of my sedan. The address of the county courthouse was printed at the top of the injunction. I programmed the navigation system and merged onto the interstate. The drive took 35 minutes. My pulse remained remarkably steady. The courthouse was a sprawling concrete monolith designed to intimidate those who cross its threshold. I parked in the adjacent structure and walked toward the broad stone steps leading to the main entrance. I did not have to search for the plaintiffs. They were waiting for me. Richard, Patricia, and Vanessa stood near the base of the steps, congregating around a man clutching a battered leather briefcase. He wore a poorly fitted suit and possessed the hurried, unpolished demeanor of a volume litigator. This was not a high-powered corporate attorney. This was a procedural mechanic hired to file paperwork quickly and ask 0 questions. My father Richard spotted me approaching. He straightened his posture, adopting the authoritative stance he had utilized throughout my childhood to command compliance. Patricia stood beside him, clutching her designer handbag, her expression a mask of manufactured concern. Vanessa lingered slightly behind them, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant curve playing on her lips. They believed the legal ambush had secured their victory. Harper Richards stated, his voice booming across the plaza, projecting artificial disappointment. I truly hoped it would not come to this. We prefer to settle family matters privately. I stopped a few feet away, clutching the folded injunction in my right hand. You perjured yourselves in a state court. I replied, my tone conversational, devoid of any rising inflection. You claimed you provided $80,000 in seed capital for Aegis Financial 15 years ago. You know that is a fabricated lie. You diverted my college fund to finance Vanessa failed startup. Patricia sighed heavily, adopting the role of the weary matriarch. We are not here to debate ancient history, Harper. We made a financial investment in our children. We are simply claiming what is rightfully ours. Richard stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The facade of the concerned parent vanished, replaced by the ruthless extortionist lurking beneath. He lowered his voice, delivering the ultimatum. You are going to approve the $2 million commercial loan for your sister, Richard demanded. You are going to sign the authorization today, and you are going to wire the funds by tomorrow morning. If you refuse, my attorney will proceed with the asset freeze. This injunction targets your personal wealth and your executive compensation. If the market discovers the CEO of Aegis Financial has frozen assets due to an ownership dispute, your investors will panic. Your company will bleed capital. You will face a liquidity crisis before the weekend. They were not merely threatening my personal bank accounts. They were threatening the operational stability of my entire firm. They understood that in the financial sector, reputation and liquidity are synonymous. A rumor of an ownership dispute could trigger a catastrophic run on the company. They were willing to annihilate my career to salvage Vanessa's superficial empire. I looked at the three of them. There was no hesitation in their eyes, no lingering guilt over destroying their youngest daughter's life work. They viewed me as an expendable resource. I unfolded the injunction. I did not tear it up or throw it in their faces. I studied the signature block at the bottom of the final page. I am trained in risk analysis. I examine documents to identify anomalies that others overlook. I read the name of the presiding judge who had signed the emergency order, Judge Eris Thorne. The name triggered an immediate association in my mind. In my line of work, navigating municipal regulations and zoning laws requires a comprehensive understanding of the local political landscape. Judge Thorne was a prominent figure in the county judicial system. However, his name was also frequently mentioned in hushed tones during real estate development seminars. I looked past my father and focused my gaze on Vanessa. Where is Bradley? I asked, referring to Vanessa's husband. Vanessa smirked, shifting her weight. Bradley is busy managing the portfolio. He does not need to be here to watch you surrender. I returned my attention to the signature on the injunction. The pieces of the conspiracy rapidly clicked into a cohesive, terrifying picture. This was not a desperate last-minute maneuver drafted by a cheap lawyer. This was a coordinated systemic assault. Bradley operated a sprawling commercial real estate firm. His business relied heavily on expedited zoning approvals and favorable municipal rulings. In the realm of commercial development, political connections are currency. I recalled a brief, obscure article buried in a financial blog a few years ago. It detailed a series of shell companies investing in suburban retail spaces. One of those shell companies, tightly linked to Bradley firm, listed a silent partner. The silent partner was an entity managed by Judge Eris Thorne brother. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The judge who signed this emergency injunction freezing my assets based on a blatantly perjured affidavit possessed a hidden financial tie to Vanessa's husband. This was not a family dispute over a loan. This was a calculated scheme of corporate raiding facilitated by judicial corruption. They had weaponized a compromised judge to extort $2 million from my firm. I slowly refolded the injunction and placed it back into my pocket. I did not reveal my discovery. If you expose your leverage prematurely, the enemy has time to fortify their position. You wait until they are fully committed to the trap. You really believe this piece of paper forces my hand, I stated, meeting my father's gaze with absolute calm. Richard chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. It is a court order, Harper. You cannot outsmart a judge. You approve the loan or you lose the company. Make your choice. I looked at my mother, who offered a tight, unsympathetic smile, and then at Vanessa, who was already visualizing the $2 million wire transfer. They believed they held all the cards. They believed their corrupted judicial strategy was bulletproof. I will return to my office, I said, my voice eerily quiet. I will process the application. Vanessa let out a small, triumphant breath. I knew you would see reason, she gloated. Have the documents ready for signature by 5 o'clock. I turned my back on my family without another word. I walked down the stone steps toward the parking structure. They thought my compliance was a surrender. They thought I was retreating to my office to draft the loan approval and save my company from the asset freeze. They were entirely incorrect. I was not returning to my office to surrender. I was returning to unleash Marcus on the financial architecture of Bradley Real Estate Firm. If they wanted to utilize a corrupted judge to extort my company, I was going to dissect their operations until I found the radioactive core of their criminal enterprise. I unlocked my car, the metallic click echoing in the quiet garage. The family ambush had failed to secure my compliance. It had only succeeded in shifting my strategy from defensive risk management to total offensive annihilation. I put the car in gear and drove back to Aegis Financial, ready to dig into the hidden ledgers of Bradley Empire. I bypassed the executive elevator bank and took the freight lift directly to the subterranean level of the Aegis Financial building. The Forensic Accounting Division operated out of a reinforced windowless suite designed to protect highly sensitive client data. I swiped my keycard and entered Marcus' office. He was on the phone speaking in rapid, hushed tones to a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission. He ended the call the moment I locked the door behind me. They ambushed me at the courthouse, I stated, tossing the folded injunction onto his desk. Richard, Patricia, and Vanessa. They brought a volume litigator. But the lawyer is a distraction. The danger is the signature at the bottom of the page. Marcus picked up the document, his dark eyes scanning the text. Judge Eris Thorne. Thorne has a silent financial stake in a shell company tied directly to Bradley Commercial Real Estate Firm, I explained, leaning against the edge of the desk. This is not a family dispute. This is judicial extortion. They are freezing my assets to force the $2 million loan approval because they know we will discover their fraudulent financials if we run a standard audit. Marcus set the injunction down, his expression hardening into absolute focus. If Bradley is leveraging a compromised Superior Court judge to extort $2 million from a risk analysis firm, he is not just trying to save a failing business. He is trying to cover a massive immediate liability. People do not risk federal corruption charges for routine bankruptcy. They risk it when the alternative is worse. I need you to tear Bradley apart, I instructed. Ignore Vanessa inflated revenue projections. Follow the cash flow of the parent company. Find out who Bradley owes, and find out why he needs exactly $2 million before the end of the month. Marcus cracked his knuckles, swiveling his chair toward his primary workstation. He did not access standard credit bureaus or public real estate listings. He utilized a proprietary database linking municipal tax records to federal wire transfer logs. In the realm of forensic accounting, money never truly vanishes. It merely changes shape. The silent hum of the server racks provided the only soundtrack as he dissected Bradley Empire. 3 hours later, the intercom on my desk buzzed. Marcus told me to return to the basement. When I entered his office, the atmosphere was chillingly quiet. Marcus was not typing. I was staring at a complex flowchart he had mapped across his 3 monitors. The diagram traced a labyrinth of offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and high-volume cash deposits. Bradley is not a real estate developer, Marcus announced, his voice devoid of any usual warmth. He is a launderer. I moved behind his chair, analyzing the data points. Explain. Marcus highlighted a series of transactions originating from an entity named Apex Holdings. Over the past 4 years, Bradley Commercial Properties have reported an exceptionally high rate of cash transactions for commercial leases. It makes zero operational sense. Retail tenants pay via wire transfer or corporate check. Bradley Properties are accepting duffel bags of cash and booking them as legitimate lease revenue. He traced the line from the property management firm to a network of offshore accounts. Once the cash is legitimized through the real estate ledger, Bradley wires the clean funds to accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. These accounts belong to a syndicate operating illegal high-stakes offshore sports betting rings. Bradley uses the real estate fund as a washing machine for cartel money. The gravity of the situation anchored my feet to the floor. Vanessa was not just seeking a bailout for a mismanaged business. She was acting as the courier for a money laundering operation. Why the sudden desperation for $2 million, I asked. Marcus pulled up a final ledger. Because 3 weeks ago, a federal task force seized a significant portion of the syndicate offshore assets. Bradley is short on his quarterly wash quota. He owes the cartel exactly $2.1 million by the first of the month. If he fails to deliver the clean funds, the syndicate will not send a collection agency. They will send a message. The pieces locked into a terrifying, lethal structure. My parents had pledged their residential home as collateral. They had extorted their youngest daughter using a corrupt judge. They were orchestrating this entire conspiracy, not to build a business, but to pay off an organized crime syndicate before Bradley faced violent retaliation. "If you approve that loan and wire the funds," Marcus warned, turning his chair to face me, "you are not just making a bad business decision. You are injecting clean corporate capital into a federal money laundering operation. The moment the wire clears, you become an active co-conspirator under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You will face federal prison. They were using the judicial system to force me into committing a federal felony. Print the entire dossier," I ordered, a cold resolve freezing the panic in my chest. "We bypass the local authorities. Judge Thorne influence might extend to the district attorney office. We take this data directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We hand them the laundering operation, the corrupted judge, and the extortion plot." Marcus reached for the secure print command, but before his finger hit the key, the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall of his office flared to life. The television was permanently tuned to a local financial news network, usually providing background noise regarding market fluctuations. The breaking news banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen caught my attention. I looked up. The broadcast was not covering stock prices. It was broadcasting a live, exclusive interview. My mother, Patricia, sat in a brightly lit television studio. She wore a modest conservative cardigan, her hair styled to project the image of a respectable elderly suburban woman. The host, a prominent local journalist known for sensationalizing corporate scandals, leaned forward with an expression of profound sympathy. Mrs. Patricia, the journalist, began, his tone somber. "You are stating that the CEO of Aegis Financial, a prominent firm in our city, built her empire using stolen funds." Patricia dabbed her eyes with a tissue, producing a remarkably convincing tear. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "Harper is my daughter. 15 years ago, my husband and I drained our entire life savings, $80,000 meant for our retirement, and gave it to her as seed capital to start her business. We believed in her dream. We trusted her." Patricia looked directly into the camera lens, delivering the fatal blow. "Now that the company is worth millions, she has cut us out entirely. She refuses to acknowledge our foundational investment. She has left her father and me facing financial ruin in our twilight years, while she lives in luxury. We had to file a lawsuit just to survive. It breaks a mother's heart to see her child become so ruthlessly corrupted by greed." The broadcast cut to a graphic displaying my professional headshot alongside the Aegis Financial logo, branded with the word "fraud" in bold red letters. I stared at the television screen. The air evacuated my lungs. They had escalated the warfare from the courtroom to the court of public opinion. They knew I possessed the capability to uncover Bradley laundering operation. They knew I might approach the authorities. The television interview was a preemptive, scorched earth tactic. By publicly branding me as an unethical thieving executive who scammed her own elderly parents, they were systematically destroying my credibility. If I walked into an FBI field office now claiming my family was involved in a massive money laundering conspiracy, I would not look like a whistleblower. I would look like a desperate, vindictive CEO fabricating wild accusations to retaliate against the parents suing me for their retirement funds. They had effectively neutralized my ability to report them to law enforcement. Marcus muted the television, the silence in the subterranean office sudden and heavy. He looked at the printed dossier detailing the cartel connections, then at the frozen image of my mother weeping on the screen. "They just poisoned the well," Marcus stated, his analytical mind processing the strategic devastation. "The authorities will view any evidence you submit as retaliatory slander. You are trapped." The public smear campaign was designed to incite panic. It was engineered to force my board of directors to demand my resignation to save the company reputation. Richard and Patricia had calculated that losing my position as CEO was the only threat significant enough to force me to approve the $2 million cartel payment. They thought they had checkmated me on national television. They believed public humiliation would break my resolve. I picked up the printed dossier of Bradley Criminal Enterprise. I was not going to the FBI. I was going to use the exact weapon they demanded I give them. I was going to give them the loan. The fallout from the television broadcast was immediate and catastrophic. In the financial sector, trust is the only currency that truly matters. When a CEO is publicly accused of defrauding elderly parents, the market reacts with brutal efficiency. By the time I took the elevator back up to the 40th floor, my phone was a continuous stream of urgent notifications. The public relations team reported an influx of media inquiries. The compliance department noted a surge in regulatory scrutiny. The stock price of Aegis Financial, a metric I had meticulously cultivated over 5 years, plummeted 11% within the first hour of trading. My executive assistant met me at the elevator doors, her face pale. Harper, the board of directors, just issued an emergency summons. They are waiting for you in conference room A. I did not stop to gather notes or review talking points. I walked directly into the glass-enclosed boardroom. The 7 members of the Aegis board sat around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from deep concern to overt hostility. These were men and women who managed billions in assets. They did not care about family drama. They cared about liability. "Harper, we have a rapidly deteriorating situation," stated Arthur, the chairman of the board, bypassing any formal greeting. 2 of our largest institutional clients contacted my office 10 minutes ago. They are threatening to pull their capital. They cannot afford the optics of an ongoing federal injunction tied to elder abuse. I took my seat at the head of the table. "The allegations are entirely fabricated," I stated, maintaining eye contact with the chairman. "My parents did not provide seed capital for this firm. I built this company independent of their resources. They filed a fraudulent injunction to extort a commercial loan for my sister failing real estate venture." Arthur sighed, steepling his fingers. "The veracity of the allegations is irrelevant in the short term. The public perception is disastrous. We are operating in a climate where corporate malfeasance destroys firms overnight. We cannot weather a protracted high-profile legal battle regarding the foundational ownership of this company." He leaned forward, delivering the inevitable ultimatum. "The board is requesting that you step down as CEO effective immediately pending a full internal investigation. A leave of absence will demonstrate to the market that we take these allegations seriously and stabilize our client base." They were asking me to surrender the empire I built to appease a fabricated media narrative. My parents had engineered the perfect corporate assassination. If I stepped down, I lost the authority to deny Vanessa loan. An interim CEO focused solely on mitigating the public relations disaster might approve the $2 million payout simply to make the lawsuit and the negative press vanish. The cartel would receive their laundered funds, my parents would secure their victory, and I would be permanently exiled from my own creation. I did not flinch. I did not plead my case using emotion or family history. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a single, encrypted flash drive onto the center of the mahogany table. This drive contains the preliminary findings of a forensic audit conducted by our internal division this morning, I announced, ensuring my voice carried the unmistakable authority of the chief executive. The real estate venture seeking the $2 million loan is a front. My sister husband is utilizing commercial leases to launder cash for an offshore gambling syndicate. They need the capital to cover a severe liquidity deficit caused by a recent federal asset seizure. The boardroom fell silent. The board members stared at the small silver drive, the implications of organized crime suddenly overriding the public relations crisis. "If we approve that loan to make the lawsuit disappear," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room, "Aegis Financial becomes an active participant in a federal money laundering operation. The moment the wire transfer clears, every person sitting at this table becomes subject to a RICO investigation." Arthur's face tightened. "Are you certain of this intelligence?" "The data is irrefutable," I confirmed. "My parents initiated the smear campaign and filed the injunction to force my hand before we uncovered the criminal architecture of the portfolio. Stepping down signals capitulation. It allows a compromised application to proceed. I will not hand this company over to federal prosecutors to save my sister." The chairman exhaled slowly, the magnitude of the threat recalibrating his strategy. "If we reject the loan outright, your family will escalate the media attacks. The stock will continue to bleed. We cannot sustain this pressure indefinitely. What is your proposed course of action?" I placed my hands flat on the table, projecting absolute control. "Give me 7 days," I demanded. I will not step down. I will not issue a public denial that fuels the news cycle. I will dismantle the entire criminal operation from the inside. I will not merely clear my name. I will secure the collateral they offered and absorb the entirety of their supply chain. Give me 1 week, and Aegis Financial will emerge stronger and undeniably secure." The board members exchanged hesitant glances. In the world of high finance, a calculated risk is often preferable to guaranteed federal exposure. Arthur looked at the flash drive, then back at me. 7 days, Harper. If this situation is not resolved and our stock price does not recover, the board will convene to formally remove you. I nodded, acknowledging the ticking clock. 7 days is more than enough. I left the boardroom and returned to my private office. The silence of the executive suite offered a stark contrast to the storm raging outside the building. I had secured a temporary reprieve from the board, but the fundamental problem remained. If I reported the laundering to the authorities now, the corrupted judge and the poisoned media narrative would bury the evidence. I needed a mechanism to destroy them legally, utilizing their own greed against them. I picked up my phone and dialed Vanessa's number. I needed to execute the next phase of the honeypot. I needed to play the role of the defeated, desperate sister. The line rang twice before Vanessa answered. Her voice carried the smug, triumphant tone of a woman who believed she had just won a war. Harper, Vanessa purred. "Calling to surrender." The television interview was quite effective, was it not? The court of public opinion moves much faster than the legal system. I forced my voice to sound strained, injecting a slight tremor into my delivery. "You are destroying my company, Vanessa. The board is threatening to remove me. The clients are pulling out." "That is unfortunate," she replied, feigning sympathy. "A simple signature on the loan approval could make all of this unpleasantness disappear. Mom would happily issue a public retraction, stating it was all a terrible misunderstanding. The injunction vanishes, and you get to keep your corner office." I let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "Fine. You win. I will approve the $2 million loan." A sharp intake of breath echoed over the line. Vanessa had not expected me to capitulate so quickly. She tried to mask her relief, but the desperation for the cartel money bled through her confident facade. "Excellent decision, Harper. Wire the funds by close of business today." "No," I countered, inserting a non-negotiable condition. "I am not wiring $2 million based on a digital signature. If I am bailing you out and saving my company, we are doing this properly. I will draw up the final contract this afternoon. We sign the documents in person tomorrow morning at Mom and Dad House. I want them present when I hand over the capital. It is the only way I can guarantee they will withdraw the lawsuit and the media campaign." Vanessa hesitated. The demand for an in-person signing delayed the funds by 24 hours, but the promise of guaranteed capital was too enticing to reject. She needed the money to appease Bradley Criminal Associates before the end of the month. "Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Vanessa agreed. "Bring the paperwork. And Harper, do not try anything clever. Bradley will be reviewing the contract. I will bring the standard commercial lending agreement," I assured her. "I just want this nightmare to end." I ended the call, the feigned desperation vanishing instantly from my posture. I did not intend to bring a standard commercial lending agreement. I intended to bring a financial death warrant disguised as a bailout. I contacted the legal department and instructed my lead contract attorney to draft the documents. I specified the inclusion of a very particular, highly aggressive covenant hidden deep within the boilerplate language. I was going to construct a Trojan horse, and I was going to let my family wheel it directly into their own living room. The drive to my childhood home in the Chicago suburbs was a journey I had not made in a decade. I navigated the familiar tree-lined streets with a cold, clinical detachment. I did not feel a surge of nostalgia viewing the manicured lawns or the familiar brick facades. I felt only the strategic focus of an executive preparing to close a hostile acquisition. I parked my car in the driveway, noting the presence of Richard's luxury sedan and Vanessa's sleek sports utility vehicle. Marcus parked his unmarked vehicle a block away, maintaining a secure perimeter while monitoring the encrypted digital feeds from Aegis Financial. He was waiting for my signal. I walked up the slate pathway and rang the doorbell. My mother Patricia opened the door. She wore a pristine cashmere twin set projecting the image of a gracious suburban matriarch. The weeping, victimized woman from the television broadcast was entirely absent. She offered a tight, victorious smile, stepping aside to allow me entry into the foyer. Harper Patricia greeted her tone laced with patronizing satisfaction. "I am glad you decided to act sensibly. Family should always support one another." I did not return the greeting. I bypassed her and walked directly into the formal living room. Richard and Vanessa were already seated on the plush leather sofas. A silver tea service rested on the mahogany coffee table, an absurd attempt to civilize a blackmail negotiation. Vanessa's husband Bradley was conspicuously absent, likely managing the escalating pressure from his cartel associates. Richard gestured toward an empty armchair opposite them. "Take a seat, Harper," Richard commanded, adopting the authoritative posture he utilized to dominate every family interaction. "Let us review the paperwork and finalize this unfortunate misunderstanding." I remained standing. I withdrew a thick, legal-sized folder from my briefcase and placed it squarely in the center of the coffee table. I did not project anger or defiance. I projected the hollow compliance of a defeated adversary. "The $2 million commercial loan agreement," I stated, gesturing toward the folder. "The terms dictate an immediate wire transfer upon the execution of these documents. The funds will be routed directly to the designated corporate account listed in Vanessa's application." Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes fixated on the folder. The desperation for the cartel payout momentarily eclipsed her usual arrogance. She reached for the documents, her manicured fingers flipping rapidly through the dense boilerplate legal text. "You brought the standard commercial lending agreement," Vanessa verified, scanning the header. "Yes," I confirmed smoothly. "Standard commercial terms." I lied. The document was an intricate legal minefield designed by my lead contract attorney. Buried on page 27, obscured beneath layers of impenetrable financial jargon regarding asset securitization and default triggers, lay a highly specific, highly aggressive stipulation known as a cross-collateralization covenant. In standard commercial lending, if a borrower defaults on a specific loan, the lender seizes the specific asset pledged for that single transaction. A cross-collateralization clause fundamentally alters the rules of engagement. It links multiple distinct assets and liabilities together under a unified umbrella. The clause I inserted stipulated that any verified instance of material misrepresentation, financial fraud, or falsified revenue data within the initial loan application would constitute an immediate incurable event of default. The penalty for triggering this specific default was total financial annihilation. The clause granted Aegis Financial the irrevocable legal right to instantly recall the $2 million principal, seize the primary commercial entity operating under Bradley name, and immediately foreclose on the secondary collateral pledged by the guarantors. The secondary collateral was the 5-bedroom colonial house we were currently standing in. I watched them review the paperwork. I knew Richard possessed a rudimentary understanding of business law, but he lacked the forensic expertise to decipher complex securitization covenants. I knew Vanessa was blinded by the ticking clock of the cartel deadline. They believed their leverage was absolute. They believed the media smear campaign and the frozen assets had broken my spirit. Arrogance breeds intellectual laziness. They did not hire an independent attorney to review the final contract because they assumed I was too terrified to fight back. Richard skimmed the signature pages, eager to conclude the transaction and secure their victory. "We are signing this as the primary guarantors," Richard confirmed, pointing to the secondary collateral section. "The lien against this house is a mere formality. Vanessa Business will generate the capital to service the debt within a quarter." I maintained a neutral expression, suppressing the cold satisfaction building in my chest. "Yes, a mere formality," I agreed quietly. Vanessa clicked a silver pen, her hand hovering over the primary borrower line. "Just sign the retraction for the media." Harper Vanessa demanded a final assertion of dominance. "Mom will issue the statement tomorrow confirming the $80,000 seed capital claim was a misunderstanding and the lawsuit will be dismissed." I nodded, playing the role of the submissive sibling to perfection. "I just want my company stabilized. Let us finish this." Vanessa signed her name with a flourish, validating the fraudulent financial data submitted in her initial application. She handed the pen to Richard. My father did not hesitate. He signed away the equity of his retirement sanctuary, convinced he was executing a masterful corporate maneuver. He passed the pen to Patricia, who added her signature with a smug, self-satisfied smile. They pushed the executed contract across the coffee table toward me. "Wire the funds," Richard instructed, settling back into the leather sofa. I picked up the contract, verifying all 3 signatures were legible and legally binding. I slid the documents back into my briefcase and secured the latch. I pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket and opened a secure encrypted messaging application linked directly to Marcus. I typed a single 2-word command, "Execute audit." I hit send. The digital signal transmitted from the living room to Marcus' vehicle parked down the street, interfacing seamlessly with the Aegis financial servers located 40 floors above the city. I looked at my family. The performance was over. The honeypot had successfully captured the predators. I did not need to feign defeat any longer. "The funds are currently processing through the automated clearinghouse," I announced, my voice dropping the facade of compliance, returning to the sharp, decisive cadence of a chief executive. "However, the disbursement is contingent upon the automated verification of the submitted financial data." Vanessa frowned, a flicker of confusion breaking through her triumphant demeanor. "What automated verification? You just reviewed the physical documents." "Aegis Financial employs a proprietary algorithmic risk assessment protocol," I explained, walking toward the foyer. "Our systems automatically cross-reference all submitted tax returns and revenue projections with federal and municipal databases the moment a contract is finalized in the system." Richard stood up, the first trace of genuine alarm registering in his posture. "Harper, what did you do?" I paused at the front door, turning to face the 3 architects of my intended destruction. "I accepted your collateral," I stated coldly. The Trojan horse was inside the gates, and the hidden soldiers were already dismantling the city. I stepped out of the house, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me, leaving them in the silent, oblivious calm before the storm. I walked down the slate pathway toward my car, knowing that within 12 hours, the automated audit would trigger a financial catastrophe they could not escape. The architecture of a modern financial trap does not rely on dramatic courtroom reveals or sudden police raids. It relies on the cold, dispassionate execution of code. When Marcus received my encrypted command from the street outside my parents' house, he initiated the Aegis financial forensic algorithm. The system did not just review Vanessa's submitted application, it dissected it. It pulled federal tax transcripts, compared them against municipal property filings, and identified the fabricated revenue streams Vanessa used to inflate her portfolio. The algorithm found the phantom commercial leases and the falsified depreciation schedules within minutes. It flagged the entire application as a verified instance of material misrepresentation. At exactly 6 o'clock the following morning, 12 hours after the $2 million wire transfer cleared the automated clearinghouse, the Aegis servers executed the next phase of the protocol. The system generated a formal, legally binding notification of technical default. It dispatched the document via certified email to Vanessa corporate address, copying Richard and Patricia as the primary guarantors. I arrived at my office on the 40th floor at 7:30. I poured a cup of black coffee and monitored the read receipts on my terminal. At 8:14, the notification was opened. At 8:16, my direct office line began to ring. I ignored the first 3 calls. I let the reality of the situation saturate their panic. When the phone rang for the 4th time, I picked up the receiver. "Harper, what the hell is this?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice stripped of all its polished, arrogant veneer. It sounded ragged, frantic. "The bank just froze the $2 million you wired. They flagged the account for a corporate clawback. What is a technical default?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the silence before delivering the devastating reality. A technical default occurs when a borrower violates a specific covenant within a lending agreement, regardless of whether a payment has been missed, I explained, utilizing the precise, detached tone of a risk analyst. Our automated forensic audit confirmed that the tax returns and revenue projections you submitted in your application were falsified. You committed wire fraud to secure a commercial loan. "You cannot do this," Vanessa stammered, the panic escalating into sheer terror. "We had an agreement. Mom is dropping the lawsuit today. You have to unfreeze the funds. Bradley needs that capital transferred by noon." "The agreement you signed yesterday contained a cross-collateralization covenant." I continued, methodically dismantling her defenses. Section 4, paragraph 9. It clearly states that any material misrepresentation in the application triggers an immediate incurable default. The $2 million principal is now due in full immediately, along with an 18% punitive interest fee. "You set us up." Vanessa gasped, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. You knew the financials were altered. You let us sign the paperwork so you could trap us. I did not force you to submit fraudulent tax returns, Vanessa. I simply built a system that catches them, I replied coldly. Because you cannot repay the $2 million today, Aegis Financial is exercising its legal right to seize the primary commercial entity operating under Bradley name, and we are initiating foreclosure proceedings on the secondary collateral. What secondary collateral, Vanessa demanded, though I knew she already understood the answer. The 5-bedroom colonial house in Chicago, I stated. I am evicting our parents. The line went dead. She did not argue. She did not threaten me with the media smear campaign. She hung up because the situation had escalated far beyond family politics or public relations. The $2 million was frozen. Bradley could not pay the offshore gambling syndicate by the noon deadline. The cartel would not care about cross-collateralization covenants or corporate clawbacks. They only cared about missing capital. I had effectively cut off the cartel money supply, and Bradley was the one holding the empty bag. I placed the receiver back onto the cradle and instructed my executive assistant to lock down the executive suite. I knew a desperate man facing violent retaliation would not respond with legal briefs. He would respond with brute force. At 11:30, the tranquility of the Aegis Financial lobby shattered. The heavy glass security doors at the main entrance, designed to require keycard access, bowed inward violently. Bradley did not bother negotiating with the front desk receptionists. He bypassed the security protocols, entirely flanked by 2 towering, broad-shouldered men wearing dark suits that failed to conceal the bulk of their physical builds. These were not corporate attorneys. They were muscle likely dispatched by the syndicate to ensure Bradley delivered the laundered funds. My office overlooked the main reception area through a wall of reinforced, soundproofed glass. I stood from my desk and walked toward the window, watching the chaos unfold on the floor below. The receptionists scrambled backward, hitting the silent panic buttons installed beneath their desks. The building security personnel moved to intercept the intruders, but the 2 men accompanying Bradley shoved them aside with practiced, brutal efficiency. Bradley's face was contorted in a mask of feral rage. He scanned the lobby, his eyes darting wildly, until he located the executive suite on the mezzanine level. He spotted me standing behind the glass. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face and charged toward the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. The 2 enforcers followed close behind, creating a wedge through the gathering crowd of terrified analysts and junior executives. I did not retreat into the inner sanctums of the office. I stood my ground, separated from him only by an inch of tempered glass. Bradley reached the executive level and hammered his fists against the locked glass door. The reinforced pane shuddered but held firm. His face was flushed veins bulging against his neck. The sophisticated real estate developer was gone, replaced by a man staring down his own execution. "Unlock the door!" Harper Bradley roared, his voice muffled but audible through the heavy glass. "You reverse the clawback right now. You release those funds to my account, or I swear to God, I will tear this building apart." I crossed my arms over my chest, maintaining absolute stillness. The security feed from the lobby cameras was already recording his assault, capturing the faces of his syndicate associates. He was publicly linking his corporate entity to organized crime enforcers in the middle of a financial district. "I need that money," Bradley screamed, slamming a heavy object, a brass statue snatched from a nearby pedestal against the glass. A spiderweb crack blossomed across the tempered surface, the sharp sound echoing through the suite. "You do not understand who you are dealing with. If that wire does not clear by noon, they are going to kill me." He pressed his face close to the fractured glass, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Release the hold, Harper, or I will have these men follow you home. I will ruin your face so badly, your own board of directors will not recognize you." I looked at the desperate man, the enforcers standing behind him, and the cracked glass separating us. He believed his threats of physical violence would override my corporate authority. I thought bringing syndicate muscle into my firm would force a concession. He did not realize that exposing his cartel connections on camera was exactly what I needed to elevate this corporate dispute into a federal criminal investigation. The trap had sprung, and Bradley had walked right into the jaws of the beast. The spiderweb fracture spreading across the tempered glass of the executive suite door did not compromise the structural integrity of the barrier. The brass statue Bradley wielded had damaged the aesthetic surface, but the reinforced core remained intact. I stood 3 feet away from the furious, desperate man, watching his escalating meltdown with the detached observation of a scientist studying a volatile chemical reaction. I did not flinch when the brass struck the pane again. I did not scramble for my desk phone to summon the local police department. Local authorities would treat this as a simple corporate disturbance or a trespassing violation. I needed this altercation documented for a much higher jurisdiction. Bradley dropped the dented statue onto the carpeted floor. He realized the physical assault on the door was futile. The 2 enforcers flanking him shifted uncomfortably, their eyes scanning the mezzanine level, likely calculating their extraction routes before the building security regrouped. They were hired muscle-paid to intimidate, not to wage a protracted siege in the center of a heavily monitored financial district. Bradley's chest heaved as he glared at me through the fractured glass. He pulled a sleek, expensive smartphone from his jacket pocket. He did not dial a number. He opened a secure messaging application and pressed the icon to record an audio note. He held the device up to his mouth, ensuring his eyes remained locked onto mine. "Listen to me very carefully," Harper Bradley snarled into the phone, his voice ragged, devoid of any polished corporate restraint. "You are going to lift the clawback on those funds. You are going to release my $2 million by the end of the day. If you touch my money, or if you attempt to seize my company under that fraudulent cross-collateralization clause, I will tear you apart. I will burn Aegis Financial to the ground with you inside it. This is not a negotiation. This is a promise." He hit send. The audio file transmitted over the cellular network, arriving directly in my encrypted corporate inbox seconds later. He lowered the phone, offering a final venomous glare before turning sharply on his heel. He signaled to the enforcers, and the 3 men retreated swiftly down the staircase, bypassing the recovering security guards and exiting the lobby through the damaged front doors. They vanished into the chaotic midday pedestrian traffic of the city. I remained standing near the damaged door, the silence returning to the executive suite. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and accessed my corporate email. The audio message Bradley had just recorded sat in my inbox, a stark, undeniable threat. He believed the recorded message was a demonstration of dominance, a tactic to terrorize me into compliance. He did not understand the sophisticated technological infrastructure surrounding a top-tier risk analysis firm. Aegis Financial manages billions of dollars in highly sensitive client data. Our physical security protocols are merely the visible layer of our defense systems. The true protection lies within the digital architecture. The security cameras mounted in the lobby and the mezzanine level were not standard closed-circuit television monitors recording onto isolated hard drives. They were high-definition biometric tracking nodes integrated directly into a federal compliance network. The moment Bradley and his known cartel associates breached the security perimeter and caused physical damage, the Aegis system engaged a threat matrix protocol. The cameras captured the facial profiles of the enforcers. The internal servers recorded the precise timestamp of the breach, logging the aggressive physical actions and the subsequent property damage. Furthermore, the audio message Bradley sent to my corporate email address was not just an intimidating voicemail. It was a digital transmission containing a direct, explicit threat of violence and arson directed at a corporate entity utilizing interstate telecommunication lines. I forwarded the audio file and the compiled security footage directly to Marcus' encrypted terminal in the basement. Bradley just delivered the federal catalyst I typed in the accompanying message. He transmitted a terroristic threat across interstate lines while attempting to extort funds linked to a known gambling syndicate. The extortion plot is no longer a civil dispute over a breached loan covenant. It is a federal criminal matter. I did not need to wait for a response from Marcus. I knew he was already packaging the data appending the forensic financial audit, detailing the cartel laundering operation, and routing the comprehensive dossier directly to his contacts within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Bradley had not just threatened my life, he had handed the federal government the precise evidence required to secure a racketeering indictment. The immediate physical danger had passed, but the corporate battlefield was shifting rapidly. The initial shockwave of the technical default and the subsequent security breach had undoubtedly reached Richard and Patricia in Chicago. If Bradley was panicked enough to storm a corporate headquarters with cartel muscle, my parents realized the situation had spiraled violently out of their control. The illusion of their brilliant financial maneuver had shattered, leaving them exposed to the brutal reality of the cross-collateralization clause they had so eagerly signed. They had pledged their 5-bedroom colonial house as secondary collateral for the $2 million loan. With the loan in immediate, incurable default, Aegis Financial possessed the legal right to foreclose on their primary residence. My parents were staring down the barrel of total financial ruin, a consequence entirely of their own making. However, Richard and Patricia were not individuals who accepted defeat gracefully. They operated on a deeply ingrained sense of entitlement, believing they were immune to the consequences that governed ordinary people. When faced with the loss of their wealth, they did not seek legal counsel or attempt to negotiate a settlement. They attempted a desperate, highly illegal maneuver to protect their assets from the impending corporate seizure. Later that afternoon, Marcus emerged from the subterranean forensic suite and entered my office. The glass door had been temporarily repaired by the maintenance staff, but the jagged spiderweb fracture remained a stark reminder of the morning assault. The FBI has received the dossier, Marcus confirmed, taking a seat opposite my desk. They are initiating a preliminary review of the syndicate connections. The terroristic threat provides the necessary leverage to expedite the warrants. Bradley is operating on borrowed time. Marcus opened a sleek tablet displaying a series of flagged banking alerts. However, we have a developing situation in Chicago. Our automated monitoring algorithms tracking the guarantor assets have triggered a massive red flag. I leaned forward, studying the data streaming across the tablet screen. Explain. Richard and Patricia are attempting an aggressive asset dump. Marcus detailed, his tone reflecting the grim reality of the situation. Within the last 3 hours, they initiated a series of high-speed wire transfers, moving the entirety of their liquid savings accounts, their retirement portfolios, and the cash value of their life insurance policies. They are draining every accessible account registered under their names. Where are they moving the capital? I asked, recognizing the chaotic desperation of the maneuver. They are transferring everything into newly established irrevocable trust accounts, entirely controlled by Vanessa Marcus, revealed, highlighting the routing numbers. Furthermore, municipal property records show they filed an expedited quitclaim deed this afternoon, attempting to transfer the legal title of several smaller investment properties and luxury vehicles directly into Vanessa's name. The strategy was brutally transparent. Richard and Patricia knew Aegis Financial would initiate foreclosure proceedings against their assets to recoup the defaulted $2 million loan. In a frantic attempt to protect their wealth, they were liquidating their accounts and transferring the legal ownership of their remaining properties to their golden child. They believed that if their bank accounts were empty and their names were removed from the property deeds, Aegis would have nothing left to seize. They thought they could simply hide their money behind Vanessa's name and weather the storm. They are trying to bankrupt themselves on paper to avoid the foreclosure, I stated, summarizing the reckless strategy. Marcus nodded, a cold, analytical precision sharpening his features. They assume this is a simple game of hide-and-seek. They do not realize they just escalated a civil breach of contract into a major federal offense. The legal term for transferring assets to avoid an impending debt collection or a known creditor is fraudulent conveyance. It is a severe violation of federal bankruptcy laws and financial regulations. By attempting to hide their wealth from a corporate entity actively pursuing a legitimate claim, Richard and Patricia had crossed the line from arrogant negligence into deliberate, actionable fraud. They had just handed me the final devastating weapon I needed to dismantle their entire empire. The digital trail of a panicked asset dump is chaotic and impossible to conceal from a forensic auditor. Marcus sat in the subterranean control room of Aegis Financial, the glow of multiple monitors illuminating his focused expression. He watched the financial lifeblood of Richard and Patricia flow across the screens in real time. They were draining decades of accumulated wealth, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into newly established trust accounts controlled exclusively by Vanessa. The quitclaim deeds for their secondary investment properties were processing through the municipal registries, legally transferring ownership to their favored daughter. Marcus did not scramble to freeze the transfers. He did not dispatch emergency cease and desist orders to the participating financial institutions. A seasoned hunter does not interrupt a target while it is willingly walking into a snare. He simply documented every transaction, captured the routing numbers, and compiled a meticulous time-stamped ledger of the activity. They are operating under the delusion that moving money across state lines renders it invisible. Marcus noted, his voice carrying a dry, clinical amusement. They are treating a federal financial system like a shell game. I stood behind his chair, observing the rapid depletion of my parents' net worth. They believe that if they are destitute on paper, Aegis cannot enforce the cross-collateralization clause against their assets, I summarized. They think they are protecting their retirement from a corporate seizure. Marcus nodded, his fingers dancing across the keyboard to initiate a secondary tracking algorithm. The legal doctrine they are violating is fraudulent conveyance. It is the intentional transfer of property or capital designed to hinder, delay, or defraud a known creditor. When a borrower, or in this case a primary guarantor, is facing an imminent default and a subsequent asset seizure, attempting to hide that wealth by gifting it to a relative is not a clever loophole. It is a federal crime. The implications were profound. A civil dispute over a breached commercial loan contract typically results in a protracted legal battle resulting in asset forfeiture or bankruptcy. It is a painful, financially devastating process, but it rarely involves criminal prosecution. By deliberately transferring their wealth to Vanessa to avoid paying the Aegis debt, Richard and Patricia had escalated the conflict into the realm of criminal fraud. They had just handed federal prosecutors the requisite evidence to pursue wire fraud and conspiracy charges. They intended to save their 5-bedroom colonial house. Instead, they had guaranteed their own indictment. Document every single transfer, I instructed, the strategy crystallizing in my mind. Compile the fraudulent conveyance data and append it to the cartel laundering dossier we are preparing for the FBI. We will deliver the entire network, the syndicate connections, the corrupted judge, and the fraudulent asset transfers in one comprehensive package. Marcus saved the encrypted ledger, securing the final piece of the evidentiary puzzle. The trap is fully loaded, Harper. The federal authorities have the jurisdiction, and now they possess the motive and the mechanism. We just need the appropriate moment to execute the strike. The moment presented itself 3 days later, arriving via an embossed heavy cardstock envelope delivered by specialized courier to my executive suite. Despite the looming threat of the cartel deadline and the catastrophic failure of the $2 million loan, Vanessa refused to accept defeat. The illusion of her success was the only currency she truly valued. She believed the sudden influx of our parents' liquidated assets provided her with a temporary financial shield. She believed she had successfully hidden their wealth from the Aegis auditors, granting her enough breathing room to execute one final desperate maneuver to satisfy Bradley's dangerous creditors. I opened the thick envelope. Inside rested an opulent, gold-foiled invitation to a high-profile charity gala hosted by Vanessa real estate firm. The event was scheduled for the upcoming Saturday evening at a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. I read the details of the gala. It was billed as an exclusive networking event for premier real estate developers and venture capitalists, ostensibly raising funds for a local housing initiative. In reality, it was a thinly veiled attempt to attract new investors. Vanessa needed an immediate, massive injection of clean capital to pay the $2 million debt to the offshore gambling syndicate and prevent Bradley from facing violent retaliation. She intended to use the gala to solicit new funds, effectively utilizing the charity event as a front to wash new investor money and satisfy the cartel demands. Tucked behind the formal invitation was a smaller handwritten note card. The elegant cursive script belonged to Vanessa. I read the brief message. You thought you could break me with a technical default. You failed. Mom and Dad protected the family assets, and I am securing the new capital this weekend. You will get your $2 million, but you will never touch our properties. Come to the gala, Harper. Come and watch the real winners secure the future. I stared at the handwritten taunt. The sheer blinding arrogance required to invite the CEO of the firm you just defrauded to a charity gala designed to launder money was astounding. Vanessa believed her parents' asset dump had successfully neutralized my leverage. She thought the cross-collateralization clause was now useless because there was nothing left to seize. She believed she had outmaneuvered me, and she wanted me in the audience to witness her triumph. She did not know that I held the complete forensic ledger of the fraudulent conveyance transfers. She did not know that her attempt to hide the money was a federal felony. She did not know that the FBI was currently reviewing the audio recording of Bradley terroristic threats alongside the evidence of the cartel money laundering operation. She wanted me to attend the gala to witness her victory. I placed the invitation and the handwritten note back into the embossed envelope. I had spent 15 years building a financial empire from the remnants of a stolen college fund. I had weathered their extortion, their media smear campaigns, and the physical assaults on my corporate headquarters. I was not going to decline the invitation. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Marcus' extension in the forensic suite. "Clear your schedule for Saturday evening," I instructed, my voice sharp and decisive. "We are attending a charity gala in Chicago. Contact your federal liaisons and coordinate the timing. Vanessa wants an audience for her final performance. We are going to ensure she receives a spectacular finale." The air in downtown Chicago on a Saturday evening carries a specific kind of electric tension. The city hums with ambition wealth and the quiet execution of high-stakes transactions. I stood on the sidewalk outside the historic five-star hotel hosting Vanessa Charity Gala, buttoning the jacket of my tailored black suit. I did not choose a flowing evening gown designed to blend into the sea of polite society. I chose the stark, uncompromising lines of corporate armor. Marcus stood to my left wearing a charcoal tuxedo that failed to mask his imposing athletic build. My older brother David stood to my right. David had severed ties with Richard and Patricia over a decade ago, recognizing their toxic narcissism long before it culminated in extortion. He had built a successful architectural firm, married Marcus, and lived a life entirely insulated from the family chaos. He attended the gala tonight not to seek closure or demand apologies, but to stand as a silent, unwavering witness to the inevitable collapse of the empire that discarded us. "We are entering a volatile environment," Marcus noted, adjusting his cuffs. "Bradley is desperate. The cartel deadline is looming, and he requires fresh investor capital tonight to cover the offshore laundering deficit. The presence of federal agents in the vicinity might trigger a panicked reaction. The federal teams are positioned in the service corridors and the subterranean parking levels," I replied, verifying the operational logistics. "They will not initiate the raid until the primary targets are consolidated in the main ballroom and the financial solicitations are underway. We need to control the narrative until the strike is authorized." I handed my invitation to the attendant stationed at the velvet ropes outside the grand entrance. The attendant scanned the gold-foiled card, nodded respectfully, and gestured for us to proceed. We bypassed the bustling coat check and entered the opulent main lobby. The space was a breathtaking display of orchestrated wealth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated towering floral arrangements and ice sculptures. A string quartet played softly in the corner, providing an elegant soundtrack for the hundreds of politicians, venture capitalists, and real estate developers mingling with champagne flutes in hand. This was the illusion Vanessa had sacrificed everything to maintain. She was attempting to wash her fraudulent enterprise in the pristine waters of high society philanthropy. I scanned the room, locating the primary targets near the grand staircase leading to the main ballroom. Vanessa stood at the center of the crowd, radiant in a cascading emerald green designer gown. She laughed effortlessly, charming a group of potential investors, projecting the flawless image of a visionary corporate leader. Bradley stood beside her, his smile tight, and strained his eyes constantly darting toward the exits, betraying the immense pressure of the syndicate demands. Richard and Patricia flanked their golden daughter. My father wore a custom tuxedo radiating paternal pride as he shook hands with local politicians. My mother, draped in expensive jewels, accepted compliments on Vanessa's success with practiced humility. They looked like a dynasty at the pinnacle of their power. They looked like people who had successfully hidden their wealth and outsmarted the consequences of their actions. I began my walk toward the grand staircase, David and Marcus falling into step behind me. The sharp, decisive click of my heels against the marble floor drew the attention of the guests nearest to us. The conversations faltered as people recognized the CEO recently accused of defrauding her elderly parents. They expected me to be hiding in disgrace, weathering the media storm. They did not expect me to walk directly into the center of my sister Gala. Vanessa noticed the shift in the crowd. She turned her head, her brilliant smile freezing instantly. The emerald gown seemed to lose its luster as the color drained from her face. She spotted the tailored black suit and the unyielding expression I wore. Her eyes darted to the handwritten note she had sent me, the arrogant taunt she believed would humiliate me. She realized her provocation had not deterred me. It had summoned me. Richard tracked Vanessa's gaze. His paternal pride vanished, replaced by a flash of territorial fury. He stepped forward instinctively, moving to shield his favored daughter from the intruder. He signaled to a pair of broad-shouldered security guards stationed near the staircase. "What is she doing here?" Patricia hissed, clutching Richard's arm, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. "She is going to ruin the investor pitch. Get her out!" Richard met the advancing security guards halfway, pointing a rigid finger in my direction. "That woman is an uninvited disruption," Richard commanded, his voice carrying the entitled authority he used to dominate every room. "Remove her from the premises immediately. She is not welcome at this event." The security guards altered their trajectory, moving to intercept me before I could reach the staircase. They approached with the professional, detached efficiency of men hired to handle intoxicated or unruly guests without causing a public scene. I did not stop walking. I did not brace for a physical confrontation. I knew the operational hierarchy of the hotel had already been managed. Before the security guards could place a hand on my shoulder, the general manager of the hotel, a distinguished man in a dark, impeccable suit, materialized from the crowd. He stepped swiftly between the guards and me, raising a hand to halt their advance. The guards, recognizing the ultimate authority within the venue, immediately stepped back and lowered their hands. Richard's face purpled with indignation. "I demanded that woman be removed," Richard snapped, addressing the manager. "This is a private, ticketed event." The general manager did not look at my father. He turned his attention entirely to me, offering a deep, respectful bow. Ms. Harper, the manager, greeted his voice carrying clearly over the hushed murmurs of the surrounding guests. "We have secured the main ballroom according to your specifications. The audiovisual team has confirmed that the central microphone and the primary projection screens are fully integrated and ready for your presentation." Vanessa stumbled backward, her high heel catching on the hem of her emerald gown. Bradley reached out to steady her, his face a mask of sudden, paralyzing terror. "My presentation," Vanessa stammered, staring at the manager in disbelief. "What presentation?" "This is my gala. I am the keynote speaker." The general manager finally turned to address Vanessa, his tone polite but infused with absolute corporate finality. "I apologize for any confusion, ma'am. However, the corporate entity that holds the primary commercial lease for the grand ballroom and the adjoining event spaces went into severe technical default 48 hours ago." The manager looked back at me. "Following standard asset seizure protocols regarding defaulted commercial properties, the parent company of this hotel was absorbed by the primary creditor during the foreclosure process early this morning. Aegis Financial is now the legal owner of this venue. Ms. Harper is not a guest at your gala. She is your landlord." The revelation that Aegis Financial owned the hotel struck the grand lobby with the force of a kinetic weapon. The hushed, elegant murmurs of the gathered elite vanished, replaced by a stunned, absolute silence. Wealthy investors and influential politicians stared at the general manager processing the unprecedented corporate maneuver. A foreclosure and subsequent acquisition of a premier downtown hotel executed within a 48-hour window requires staggering capital and ruthless operational efficiency. The room suddenly understood that the woman standing before them in the stark black suit was not a disgraced daughter seeking a desperate reconciliation. She was an apex predator moving in for the kill. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The emerald gown intended to symbolize her prosperity now looked like an elaborate costume worn by an actor who had forgotten her lines. Bradley released his grip on her arm, physically distancing himself from the epicenter of the catastrophe. He realized the gala, his final desperate attempt to launder funds and appease the cartel, was dead. I did not pause to savor their shock. I bypassed my paralyzed family, ascending the wide, sweeping marble staircase leading directly into the main ballroom. David and Marcus flanked me, ensuring no one impeded my progress. The massive double mahogany doors stood open, revealing a room packed with circular dining tables, crystal centerpieces, and a towering main stage equipped with sophisticated audio-visual equipment. I walked down the center aisle, moving with the deliberate, unhurried cadence of a chief executive seizing control of a hostile board meeting. The attendees, drawn by the commotion in the lobby, followed my progression with wide eyes. I reached the stage, climbed the short flight of stairs, and walked directly to the primary podium. A spotlight previously calibrated to illuminate Vanessa's keynote address bathed me in a harsh, brilliant white light. I grasped the edges of the mahogany podium. I did not tap the microphone to command attention. I simply waited. The sheer gravity of my presence forced the remaining conversations in the room to extinguish. 200 of Chicago's wealthiest individuals turned their focus entirely to the stage. "Good evening," I stated. My voice resonated through the state-of-the-art sound system, clear, authoritative, and utterly devoid of emotion. "My name is Harper. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Financial. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I am the legal owner of this hotel, the parent corporation that manages it, and the primary creditor of the real estate fund hosting this event." A collective gasp rippled across the ballroom. Several high-profile investors, men and women who had committed millions to Vanessa's previous ventures, sat up straighter, their expressions hardening into masks of pure financial anxiety. They recognized the terminology. A primary creditor seizing the venue implies a catastrophic default. "I understand many of you received invitations to this gala under the pretense of a philanthropic housing initiative." I continued my gaze, sweeping across the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. "You were informed that your capital investments tonight would fund community development." I paused, letting the silence amplify the impending devastation. "That narrative is a fabrication," I declared, looking directly at the table nearest the stage where prominent venture capitalists were seated. The commercial real estate firm operating under the direction of Vanessa and Bradley is currently experiencing a severe, incurable liquidity crisis. The entity is fundamentally insolvent. The financial projections provided in your investor packets are entirely fraudulent. The ballroom erupted in a cacophony of frantic whispers. Venture capitalists pulled out their smartphones, furiously messaging their analysts and legal teams. The illusion of Vanessa's successful empire was burning to the ground in real time. 2 days ago, I explained maintaining total control of the narrative. The aforementioned firm secured a $2 million commercial loan from Aegis Financial. They secured this capital using falsified tax returns and fabricated depreciation schedules. Our automated forensic audits detected the wire fraud immediately. Consequently, the loan entered technical default. I looked toward the back of the ballroom. Vanessa, Richard, and Patricia had entered the space, pushing through the crowd of panicked investors. Vanessa's face was contorted with a feral, unrestrained fury. The polished socialite had vanished. To satisfy the debt and mitigate our risk exposure, Aegis Financial executed a cross-collateralization covenant, I stated, raising my voice to cut through the rising chaos in the room. We initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on all pledged assets, which included the hostile acquisition of the holding company managing this hotel. Therefore, any funds solicited tonight will not be directed toward a housing initiative. They will be seized by Aegis Financial during the liquidation process to cover the outstanding debts of a fraudulent enterprise. "You lying, vindictive bitch!" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice cracked, echoing terribly across the vast room. She sprinted down the center aisle, her high heels tearing at the expensive carpeting. She reached the stage, scrambling up the stairs with a frantic, uncoordinated desperation. She lunged toward the podium, her hands clawing wildly, attempting to rip the microphone from its stand. Marcus stepped forward instantly. He did not strike her or use excessive force. He simply executed a precise tactical block, intercepting her arms and stepping firmly between Vanessa and the podium. He stood like a solid wall of granite, unmoving and silent, effectively neutralizing her physical assault. Vanessa thrashed against his hold, screaming obscenities, her emerald gown twisting around her legs. Bradley remained near the entrance of the ballroom, his face pale, watching his wife unravel on a public stage while his cartel deadline ticked closer to expiration. "Harper, you cannot do this," Richard yelled, pushing his way to the front of the stage, his face a deep, alarming shade of purple. "You are destroying your sister life. You are ruining our family in front of the entire city." I looked down at the man who had stolen my college fund and attempted to freeze my assets using a corrupted judge. "You ruined this family 15 years ago," Richard just replied, my voice projecting clearly over the sound system. "I am simply closing the accounts." The investors were actively leaving their tables, heading for the exits to protect their portfolios. The Gala was dead. The financial trap had sprung flawlessly. I prepared to step away from the podium and allow the federal agents waiting in the service corridors to initiate the final phase of the operation. But the matriarch of the family had one final desperate maneuver remaining. Patricia shoved past Richard, her face a mask of frantic, desperate triumph. She clutched her expensive designer handbag against her chest. She reached inside and pulled out a single piece of yellowed folded paper. She held it high in the air, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. "You do not own Aegis Financial!" Patricia screamed, her voice shrill and piercing, cutting through the din of the retreating guests. "You do not own this hotel, and you do not have the right to foreclose on anything." The remaining investors, drawn by the sudden dramatic declaration, paused near the exits, turning back toward the stage. A corporate ownership dispute unfolding in real time is a rare spectacle. Patricia waved the yellowed paper frantically. "I have the foundational equity contract right here," she declared, her eyes wide with a manic desperation. "You signed this document when you were 18 years old. You needed our signature to open the initial business accounts. You agreed to transfer 50% of the voting shares and the executive control of Aegis Financial to me in exchange for our initial guidance." She took a step closer to the stage, brandishing the document like a weapon. "I am invoking my executive authority right now. I am terminating your position as CEO, and I am nullifying the foreclosure against Vanessa Company." The ballroom fell dead silent. The investors looked from Patricia to me, waiting to see if the young, aggressive CEO had just been legally decapitated by her own mother. Vanessa stopped struggling against Marcus, hold a slow, malicious grin spreading across her tear-streaked face. She believed her mother had just deployed the ultimate trump card. She thought the paper nullified the entire siege. I looked at the yellowed piece of paper in Patricia's hand. I did not show fear. I did not summon security. I looked at my mother, the woman who had stolen my future to fund her favorite child, and I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that promised absolute devastation. The yellowed paper in Patricia's hand trembled, its edges crinkling in the quiet, expansive space of the ballroom. She held it aloft as if it were a talisman capable of banishing the reality I had just constructed. The investors who had paused near the mahogany doors shifted uncomfortably, exchanging low, urgent whispers. In the high-stakes arena of corporate finance, an ownership dispute verified by an authenticated contract can paralyze a firm indefinitely. If Patricia's claim was legitimate, if she truly held 50% of the voting shares, my authority to execute the hostile acquisition of the hotel and the subsequent foreclosure on Vanessa assets evaporated instantly. Vanessa wrenched herself free from Marcus' tactical block. She smoothed the front of her ruined emerald gown, her posture realigning into a stance of arrogant triumph. The feral panic that had consumed her moments prior vanished. She turned to face the crowd, projecting the image of a wrongfully accused executive whose vindication had finally arrived. "You heard my mother," Vanessa declared, her voice ringing out sharp and combative. "Harper is a rogue CEO acting entirely outside the bounds of her legal authority. She has been orchestrating a retaliatory campaign to seize my assets without board approval. This foreclosure is null and void. The Gala will proceed, and Aegis Financial will issue a formal retraction in the morning." Richard stepped up beside Patricia, his chest puffed out, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed his tactical maneuvering had restored the natural order of the family hierarchy. He believed the patriarchal dominance he had wielded for 3 decades remained unbroken. He looked at me from the base of the stage, his eyes glittering with malice. "Step down from that podium," Harper, Richard commanded, pointing a rigid finger at the stage. "Your mother is activating her executive mandate. You are finished. We are taking control of the firm, and we are reversing the defaults. Pack your desk." The ballroom waited. The silence was heavy, pregnant with the expectation of my capitulation. They expected me to demand a recess, to scramble for my phone, and frantically consult my corporate counsel. They anticipated panic denial or a desperate attempt to negotiate a settlement before I lost everything. I did not step down from the podium. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I looked at the yellowed paper at the signature line she claimed bore my handwriting from 15 years ago, and I smiled. It was not a smile of concession or forced bravery. It was the cold, terrifying smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into the final, inescapable jaw of a trap. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sound was sharp, echoing loudly through the microphone. From the shadows near the rear service entrance of the ballroom, a figure detached itself and began a purposeful walk toward the stage. It was Jonathan Ellis, the chief legal counsel for Aegis Financial. He was a man in his late 50s, distinguished by his silver hair, wire-rimmed spectacles, and an unyielding, severe demeanor. He moved with the precise, measured steps of an attorney who had never lost a courtroom battle. He carried a thick, leather-bound dossier under his arm. The crowd parted automatically, recognizing the aura of formidable legal authority. Jonathan ascended the stairs to the stage, bypassing Vanessa without a glance, and positioned himself directly beside me at the podium. He placed the heavy dossier onto the wooden surface and opened it, revealing stacks of meticulously organized, notarized documents. I leaned back into the microphone. "My mother claims to hold a foundational equity contract executed 15 years ago," I stated, my voice echoing evenly across the room. "She asserts this document grants her 50% of the voting shares of Aegis Financial." I gestured to Jonathan. "Mr. Ellis, my chief legal counsel, has spent the last 48 hours preparing for exactly this contingency. We anticipated that when the financial extortion failed, my parents would attempt to fabricate a legal claim to my company to shield their assets from seizure." Patricia's face tightened, but she did not lower her arm. Her grip on the paper remained resolute. She believed her forgery was undetectable. "It is not fabricated." Patricia shrilled, her voice cracking slightly under the pressure of the room scrutiny. "It has your signature, Harper. It has the official notary seal from the state of Illinois dated 2009. You cannot erase a notarized contract just because it is inconvenient for your hostile takeover." Jonathan Ellis adjusted his spectacles, his gaze locking onto the document clutched in my mother hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not engage in theatrics. He spoke with the lethal clinical precision of an expert witness dismantling a defense on the stand. "Mrs. Patricia," Jonathan began, his tone polite, yet carrying an underlying edge of judicial menace, "I strongly advise you to lower that document. The assertion you are currently making in a public venue in the presence of numerous witnesses and investors constitutes a severe escalation of your legal liabilities." Patricia jutted her chin forward defiantly. "I will not be intimidated by corporate lawyers. This is a legal binding agreement. I am the co-owner of Aegis Financial." Jonathan sighed softly, a sound of profound professional disappointment. He reached into his dossier and withdrew a high-resolution enlarged photograph. He held the image up, displaying a macro-level close-up of a standard state notary seal. "The document you are holding features a notary stamp," Jonathan stated, directing his explanation not to Patricia, but to the room of investors. "You claim this document was executed and notarized 15 years ago in the year 2009. However, the physical design of notary stamps is strictly regulated and periodically updated by the Secretary of State to prevent fraud." He tapped the photograph he held. "The specific design of the notary seal visible on your document, characterized by the distinct concentric circles and the digitized serial number format, was not introduced by the state of Illinois until the year 2018. The ballroom erupted in stunned murmurs. The investors, well versed in the rigorous protocols of legal documentation, immediately grasped the devastating implication. Jonathan lowered the photograph and leaned closer to the microphone. "It is chronologically impossible for a document executed in 2009 to bear a notary seal design that did not exist until 9 years later." He paused, letting the irrefutable evidence settle over the room. "The document you are holding is not a foundational equity contract," Jonathan concluded, his voice echoing like a gavel striking a block. "It is a crude, anachronistic forgery. You did not secure an ownership stake in this company 15 years ago. You recently manufactured a fraudulent legal instrument in a desperate illegal attempt to seize control of a multi-million-dollar corporation and halt a legitimate asset foreclosure. Patricia's hand trembled violently. The yellowed paper slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the ballroom floor like a dead leaf. The arrogant, triumphant mask she had worn for decades shattered entirely, revealing the panicked, cornered criminal underneath. Richard stepped backward, physically distancing himself from his wife and the forged document lying on the carpet. He realized instantly that Patricia had not merely failed to stop the foreclosure. She had publicly incriminated them both in a massive corporate fraud scheme. Vanessa staggered against the edge of the stage. Her final desperate hope of salvation had evaporated in a matter of seconds. The realization that her empire, her social standing, and her freedom were utterly gone washed over her. She looked wildly toward the exit, seeking her husband, seeking any avenue of escape. But Bradley was no longer standing near the mahogany doors. During the chaos of Jonathan's forensic dismantling of the forged contract, Bradley had recognized the inevitable conclusion. He knew the cartel deadline had expired. He knew the funds were frozen, the holding company was seized, and the authorities were invariably closing in. He did not intend to stay and face the federal indictments or the wrath of the offshore syndicate. I watched from the podium as Bradley, his face pale and slick with sweat, began a frantic, panicked retreat. He shoved past a group of bewildered investors, abandoning his wife and her family to the devastating consequences of their shared conspiracy. He lunged toward the side service doors, desperate to vanish into the Chicago night before the trap fully closed. The sound of the forged contract hitting the carpet was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it resonated with the finality of a closing vault door. The grand ballroom, previously a theater of high society posturing, had transformed into an active crime scene. The investors did not move. They remained frozen in their tailored suits and evening gowns, watching the collapse of the family standing near the stage. The tension was palpable, a dense static charge filling the air. Jonathan Ellis stepped back from the microphone, his task complete. He had systematically dismantled the final barrier protecting my family. He closed his leather dossier with a sharp, decisive snap. The sound snapped Richard out of his paralyzed stupor. My father looked at the forged document on the floor, then at Patricia, whose face was a mask of unadulterated terror. He understood the severity of the situation. Forging a legal instrument to seize control of a corporation is not a civil dispute. It is a severe felony, carrying significant federal prison time. He had aided and abetted this conspiracy, actively participating in the extortion attempt and the fraudulent asset transfers. The realization that his retirement, his home, and his freedom were entirely gone crashed over him. He lunged toward Patricia, his voice a frantic, urgent hiss. "We need to leave, Patricia, right now. We need to call Davis." Davis was his longtime personal attorney, a man accustomed to handling minor zoning disputes and quiet divorces, not defending clients against federal fraud and racketeering indictments. Richard believed he could still retreat coordinated defense and mitigate the damage. He still operated under the delusion that he could control the outcome. He grabbed Patricia's arm, hauling her away from the stage. She stumbled, her designer heels catching on the thick carpet, her eyes wide and vacant. They moved with the awkward, desperate coordination of people attempting to flee a burning building without alerting the other occupants. Vanessa watched them retreat. Her parents, the architects of her entire reality, the safety net that had caught her every failure, were abandoning her. She was left alone at the base of the stage, surrounded by angry investors whose capital she had attempted to launder. She looked toward the side exit, searching for the husband who was supposed to be navigating the crisis. Bradley had already reached the heavy brass-handled doors leading to the service corridor. He moved with a manic, frantic energy, shoving past a bewildered waiter carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes. The glasses shattered on the marble floor of the hallway, the sharp crash echoing back into the ballroom. Bradley did not pause. He pushed through the swinging doors, his silhouette disappearing into the dimly lit service area. He was attempting to vanish to leave the city before the syndicate enforcers or the federal authorities tracked him down. I stepped back to the microphone. I did not raise my voice to stop my parents' retreat. I did not shout commands to intercept Bradley. I simply watched them scramble, observing the panic I had orchestrated. You attempted to leverage my company to cover your illicit debts, I stated, addressing the retreating figures of my family. You utilized corrupted judges, orchestrated smear campaigns, and forged legal documents to steal what I built. You believed I was still the vulnerable teenager you discarded 15 years ago. I paused, ensuring my voice carried clearly over the rising murmurs of the crowd. But you made a critical error in your calculations, I continued. You assumed you were playing a game of family dynamics. You did not realize you had initiated a federal investigation. The heavy brass-handled doors at the main entrance of the ballroom did not open quietly. They burst inward with a resounding, violent crash that shook the crystal sconces on the walls. The impact halted my parents' retreat instantly. They froze in the center aisle, trapped between the stage and the exit. A highly coordinated tactical team flooded into the opulent space. They did not wear evening attire. They wore dark, heavy tactical vests, emblazoned with bold, unmistakable yellow lettering. FBI, IRS, CI. The federal agents moved with swift, uncompromising precision, fanning out to secure every exit point in the ballroom. The sudden, overwhelming presence of armed federal authorities shattered the remaining decorum of the gala. The investors previously paralyzed by the corporate drama now scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the walls to clear a path for the advancing strike team. The illusion of a sophisticated charity event dissolved entirely. A senior federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern, uncompromising expression, strode directly down the center aisle. He bypassed the terrified guests, marching straight toward my parents. Richard and Patricia stood rooted to the spot. The color drained completely from Richard's face, replacing his usual ruddy complexion with a sickening ashen gray. Patricia clutched her designer handbag against her chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. They had spent their lives believing their wealth and social standing rendered them immune to the consequences that governed ordinary citizens. They were now facing an entity that their bank accounts could not intimidate or bribe. Richard, the senior agent, announced, his voice booming over the chaos of the room, projecting absolute authority. "Patricia, you are both under arrest." The agent did not slow his pace. He produced a thick stack of folded legal warrants from his windbreaker. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit fraud and fraudulent conveyance in connection with the deliberate illegal transfer of assets to evade an active corporate seizure," the agent stated, reciting the charges with clinical efficiency. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented in this room tonight, we are adding charges of forging a legal instrument and attempting to defraud a corporate entity." Two tactical officers moved in, flanking my parents. The swift, decisive action left no room for negotiation or argument. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent continued, the familiar Miranda warning echoing jarringly through the luxurious ballroom. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." One of the officers grabbed Richard's arm, twisting it firmly behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists resonated loudly. Richard struggled briefly, a final, futile assertion of dominance, but he was quickly subdued. The proud patriarch who had grounded his daughter in front of her entire family for asking a question was now physically restrained in front of hundreds of his peers. Another officer approached Patricia. She did not struggle. She stood paralyzed, staring blankly ahead as the cold steel closed around her wrists. The polished, arrogant matriarch who had stolen my college fund to finance her favorite child was reduced to a federal suspect, stripped of her dignity and her freedom. Vanessa, standing near the stage, watched in horrified disbelief as federal agents hauled her parents toward the main exit. She scrambled backward, her emerald gown catching on a chair leg, attempting to distance herself from the arrests. But the federal sweep was comprehensive. Another pair of agents converged on her position. Vanessa, the senior agent, called out, redirecting his focus. "You are also under arrest." An agent hoisted Vanessa to her feet, ignoring her frantic, tearful protests. "You are being charged with wire fraud, bank fraud, and active participation in a federal money laundering conspiracy operating through your commercial real estate firm." Vanessa's sobbing pleas for mercy were ignored as the agents secured her wrists in handcuffs. The golden child, the presumed heir to a fabricated real estate empire, was paraded through the center aisle in restraints, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. The guests watched in stunned silence as the architects of the conspiracy were escorted out of the hotel ballroom. The local journalists and society photographers, initially invited to document a glamorous philanthropic event, furiously documented the high-profile arrests instead. The camera flashes strobed relentlessly, illuminating the sheer devastation on their faces. The public smear campaign they had weaponized against me was about to receive a catastrophic counter-narrative written entirely in federal indictments. But the operation was not yet complete. The primary target of the money laundering investigation, the man who had brought cartel muscle into my corporate headquarters, was attempting to evade capture. As the agent secured my family, Marcus stepped out from his position near the stage. He did not watch the arrests. His focus remained locked on the side service doors, where Bradley had disappeared moments earlier. Marcus raised his hand to his earpiece, communicating directly with the federal team stationed outside the ballroom perimeter. "Target is moving through the east service corridor," Marcus relayed, his voice calm and precise. "I is attempting to access the subterranean parking structure. Intercept and secure." I stood at the podium watching the coordinated dismantling of the entire criminal network. The hostile acquisition was complete. The fraudulent debts were neutralized. The architects of my ruin were in federal custody. The empire had burned, and I was the one holding the match. The radio chatter in Marcus' earpiece crackled with sharp staccato updates. While the primary tactical team secured my parents and sister in the main ballroom, a secondary unit navigated the labyrinthine service corridors of the hotel. Bradley had a head start fueled by the sheer terror of facing both federal prosecutors and a betrayed cartel. He burst through the emergency exit stairwell, his heavy breathing echoing in the concrete shaft, descending rapidly toward the subterranean parking garage where his vehicle was stationed. He burst into the dimly lit cavernous garage. The scent of exhaust and damp concrete hung heavy in the air. He sprinted toward his luxury sports utility vehicle, fumbling frantically in his pockets for the key fob. He imagined the engine roaring to life, visualizing his escape route out of the city, hoping to vanish into the anonymity of the interstate system before the authorities locked down the perimeter. He reached his vehicle, his hand grasping the door handle, just as the headlights of 3 unmarked black SUVs flared to life at the far end of the parking lane. The vehicles accelerated rapidly, tires screeching against the concrete, executing a precise, synchronized maneuver that boxed in his car completely. The blinding high beams illuminated him like a spotlight on a dark stage. Bradley froze, shielding his eyes from the intense glare. The doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. 6 federal agents disembarked, their weapons drawn and leveled directly at him. "Put your hands on the hood of the vehicle," the lead agent commanded, the amplified voice echoing through the garage. "Do it now." The bravado that had fueled his assault on my corporate headquarters, the arrogance that allowed him to threaten my life and my company, evaporated instantly. Bradley slowly raised his hands, turning to place his palms flat against the cold metal of his car. A tactical officer moved in swiftly, kicking Bradley's legs apart and patting him down for weapons before pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp click of the steel handcuffs securing his wrists signaled the definitive end of his criminal enterprise. The laundering operation was dismantled. The cartel funds were frozen. Bradley was trapped. Back in the grand ballroom, the chaotic scene began to stabilize into the grim reality of a federal arrest scene. The investors and socialites, initially paralyzed by shock, were now actively documenting the downfall of the family that had attempted to defraud them. Smartphones were raised, recording every second as Richard, Patricia, and Vanessa were marched down the center aisle. As the agents guided them toward the main exit, Richard managed to stall his momentum, digging his heels into the thick carpet. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto me where I stood on the stage. The arrogant patriarch, the man who had stolen my future and attempted to orchestrate my ruin, looked utterly broken. Harper, Richard pleaded, his voice cracking, devoid of the booming authority he had wielded for 3 decades. "Please, you have to stop this. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them we were just trying to protect the business. We are your family. You cannot send your own mother and father to prison." Patricia sobbed openly, leaning against the tactical officer restraining her. "Harper, I am begging you. We will give the company back. We will drop the lawsuit. Just please call off the agents. We will lose everything. We will lose the house." I looked down at the two people who had consistently viewed me as a disposable resource. I remembered the day they handed my $80,000 college fund to Vanessa, telling me she was the smart one, the investment that would pay off. I remembered the grueling triple shifts, the exhaustion, and the relentless drive required to build Aegis Financial from nothing while they lived in suburban luxury. I remembered the fraudulent injunction they filed, attempting to freeze my assets and force my hand. They were not pleading for forgiveness because they recognized the magnitude of their betrayal. They were pleading for mercy because they had finally encountered a consequence they could not manipulate or buy their way out of. I did not step down from the stage to offer comfort. I did not raise my voice in a dramatic monologue about vengeance or justice. I simply leaned slightly toward the microphone, ensuring my final words to them were broadcasted clearly across the silent ballroom. "I am not the one prosecuting you, Richard." I stated my tone analytical and cold. "The federal government is prosecuting you. I merely provided the audit trail. You stole my foundation 15 years ago. You attempted to steal my empire this week. You built a trap and you stepped into it willingly." I paused, letting the finality of the statement settle over them. "You are right about one thing, Patricia." I added, my gaze shifting to my weeping mother. "You are going to lose the house. Aegis Financial is executing the foreclosure tomorrow morning. You signed the cross-collateralization agreement. The debt is due." I stepped back from the podium, turning away from their tear-streaked faces. The federal agents resumed their forward momentum, hauling the weeping, disgraced family out through the mahogany doors. The camera flashes continued to pop, immortalizing their public ruin. Jonathan Ellis closed his leather dossier, offering me a slow, respectful nod. The legal defense was impenetrable. The hostile acquisition of the hotel and the foreclosure on the residential property were legally binding and unassailable. The forged contract Patricia had attempted to wield was secured in an evidence bag, a critical piece of the impending federal trial. Marcus joined me on the stage, monitoring the radio chatter confirming Bradley's secure transport to the federal holding facility. "The operation is clean," Marcus reported, his voice low. "The syndicate assets are frozen. The laundering network is severed. The authorities will spend months unraveling the offshore accounts, but the primary threat to your firm is neutralized." I looked out across the ballroom. The remaining investors were already regrouping their initial shock, transforming into calculated corporate strategy. They recognized that Aegis Financial had not only survived a coordinated multi-pronged assault, it had absorbed the assets of the attacking entity and emerged significantly stronger. The market respects ruthlessness when it is executed with precision. By tomorrow morning, the stock price would not merely recover, it would surge. The media narrative would also undergo a violent correction. The smear campaign my parents had orchestrated, painting me as a fraudulent elder-abusing CEO, would be instantly overwritten by the federal indictments. I would not be the villain of the story. I would be the executive who uncovered a massive money laundering conspiracy and protected her firm from a hostile criminal takeover. I did not feel a sudden euphoric rush of triumph. The dismantling of my biological family was not a victory to be celebrated with champagne. It was a necessary, grueling extraction. It was the surgical removal of a toxic element that had threatened my existence for 15 years. The wound was closed. The bleeding had stopped. "Let us go home," I said to Marcus and David, turning my back on the empty podium. The gala was over, and the real work of rebuilding the portfolio would begin on Monday. But for tonight, the ledger was finally balanced. The gears of the federal justice system grind slow, but they grind exceptionally fine. 3 months passed since the charity gala collapsed into a synchronized arrest sequence. The subsequent financial devastation mirrored a controlled demolition. Vanessa and Bradley were denied bail deemed flight risks due to their established connections with offshore gambling syndicates. They sat in separate federal holding facilities, awaiting a trial that promised significant prison sentences for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The illusion of their real estate empire had evaporated, leaving behind a staggering mountain of debt and a complex network of seized assets. The impact on Richard and Patricia was swift and absolute. The cross-collateralization clause they signed in arrogance proved to be an inescapable legal vice. Aegis Financial executed the foreclosure on their 5-bedroom colonial house within 30 days. The secondary investment properties they attempted to fraudulently convey to Vanessa were seized by the government to satisfy the accumulated tax penalties and victim restitution orders. Their bank accounts, their retirement portfolios, and their carefully curated social standing were entirely liquidated. The country club memberships were revoked. The influential friends stopped answering their calls. The suburban dynasty was reduced to zero. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the executive intercom on my desk buzzed. I was reviewing the quarterly projections, noting the sharp, sustained increase in our stock valuation following the public vindication of my leadership. Harper, my assistant, stated, her voice tight with professional discomfort. There are 2 individuals in the lobby. They bypassed the initial security screening by joining a large delivery group. They are demanding to see you. They claim they are your parents. I did not instruct security to physically remove them immediately. A quiet clinical curiosity overrode my instinct to banish them. I wanted to observe the final state of the entitlement that had defined their existence. Send them up, I directed. Ensure security personnel are stationed outside my door. Minutes later, the heavy glass door of my office swung open. Richard and Patricia stepped into the room. The transformation was jarring. The tailored suits and pristine cashmere twin sets were gone. Richard wore a faded, ill-fitting raincoat. His posture hunched, the booming authority entirely extinguished. Patricia looked frail, her hair unkempt, the expensive jewelry replaced by a pervasive, exhausting desperation. They did not look like the architects of a corporate extortion scheme. They looked like people who had finally met a problem they could not manipulate. Harper Patricia began, her voice trembling, devoid of any prior arrogance. "Thank you for seeing us. We know we have no right to be here." I remained seated behind my desk, my hands folded atop a stack of compliance reports. "Why are you here?" I asked, my tone flat and uncompromising. Richard stepped forward, his eyes darting around the expansive high-rise office, taking in the tangible evidence of the empire he failed to steal. "We have nothing left, Harper," he admitted, the words catching in his throat. "The bank finalized the foreclosure yesterday. We have to vacate the house by Friday. The federal penalties drained the last of the savings. We cannot afford a security deposit for an apartment. We are going to be on the street." Patricia stepped closer to the desk, tears pooling in her eyes. It was not the performative weeping she utilized during the television broadcast. It was the raw, ugly reality of absolute ruin. "Please, Harper, we are your parents. We know we made terrible mistakes, but you cannot let us become homeless. You have so much. Just buy us a small condominium or pay for a lease. Anything. We are begging you." I looked at the 2 people standing before me. I remembered the day they informed me my college fund was gone. I remembered the grueling hours spent scrubbing floors and pulling triple shifts to pay for my own education. I remembered the television interview where Patricia wept publicly, branding me a cold-blooded thief to destroy my career. They had attempted to bankrupt my company, freeze my assets, and ruin my life to protect their favored child. Now, stripped of their weapons, they expected the bonds of blood to compel a rescue. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I did not reach for my checkbook. I retrieved a single standardized document printed on generic white paper. I placed it squarely in the center of my desk and slid it toward them. Richard picked up the paper, his hands shaking. He adjusted his glasses, reading the bold header. "What is this?" "That is a standard application for subsidized low-income housing in the outer suburbs." I explained, my voice remaining clinical and detached. "It is the same application filled out by thousands of people in this city who lose their homes and have no safety net to catch them." Patricia stared at the form in horror. "You expect us to live in subsidized housing?" She gasped, the lingering embers of her entitlement flaring up. "We cannot live there. It is dangerous. It is humiliating. You are a multi-millionaire, Harper. You can afford to put us somewhere safe." "I can afford many things," I replied, maintaining absolute stillness. "But I will not fund the retirement of the people who stole my foundation and attempted to orchestrate my ruin. You took my $80,000 college fund 15 years ago and told me I was resourceful enough to find my own way." I leaned forward, ensuring my gaze locked onto theirs. "Now it is your turn to be resourceful. Fill out the application. Join the waiting list like everyone else. Figure it out." The finality of the statement struck them with physical force. They realized the emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, and the desperate pleas were completely ineffective. The bank of familial obligation had been overdrawn and permanently closed. "Harper, please," Richard whispered, a final broken attempt to breach the wall I had built. "You are our daughter. I was your collateral." I corrected him, the words sharp and unyielding. "You ceased being my parents the moment you signed that forged equity contract." I reached out and pressed the button on my intercom. "Security, please escort the visitors out of the building. They will not be returning." The 2 security guards stationed in the hallway entered the office immediately. They flanked Richard and Patricia, gesturing firmly toward the door. My parents did not struggle. They did not shout obscenities or issue threats. The fight was entirely drained from them. They turned and walked out of the office, clutching the subsidized housing application, their shoulders stooped under the crushing weight of their own consequences. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing them out of my life permanently. I sat in the quiet of my office, the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline stretching out before me. The air felt remarkably clean. The toxic, suffocating presence that had loomed over my life for 3 decades was finally eradicated. I did not feel a sudden rush of euphoric joy, nor did I feel the hollow sting of regret. I felt the profound, stabilized peace of a structural engineer watching a faulty building safely demolished, knowing the foundation was finally clear to build something enduring. The distinct pop of a cork being pulled from a vintage bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon echoed through the quiet expanse of my penthouse apartment. I stood by the kitchen island, watching the dark ruby liquid flow into 3 crystal glasses. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky, a sprawling grid of amber and silver light. The relentless hum of the financial district felt distant up here, muted by thick glass and the profound stabilization of a secure life. I picked up 2 of the glasses and walked into the dining room. The space was designed for comfort rather than corporate intimidation. Warm, mahogany-soft ambient lighting and the scent of roasted garlic and herbs drifting from the open kitchen created an atmosphere of genuine peace. David sat at the head of the table loosening his silk tie after a long day at his architectural firm. Marcus sat beside him reviewing a digital brief on his tablet, his forensic mind finally at rest. I handed them their glasses and took my own seat. We did not raise a toast to destruction or celebrate the misery of others. We simply raised our glasses to each other, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had navigated and the fortress we had protected. The crystal chimed a clear, ringing note that settled into the calm atmosphere of the room. We did not stage a tearful family reconciliation. There were no dramatic apologies or forced attempts to rebuild a bridge that had been intentionally burned to ash. The people who shared my genetic sequence were currently discovering the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of the Municipal Housing Authority. They were standing in lines, filling out bureaucratic paperwork, and learning how the invisible half of the city survives. They were experiencing the exact reality they had callously designed for me 15 years ago. David took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze wandering toward the city lights. He had made his choice to walk away from Richard and Patricia over a decade ago. He understood the psychological toll of severing those specific ties. When I left them, I spent years wondering if I had made the right decision. David began, his voice reflective, devoid of any lingering resentment. Society conditions you to believe that walking away from your parents is the ultimate betrayal. They install this deep-seated guilt, demanding you honor the people who gave you life, regardless of how they choose to treat you. He looked at me, an expression of profound validation settling on his features. Watching them attempt to dismantle your firm, watching them leverage a corrupted judge and a fraudulent contract to steal your life work, erased any remaining doubt I harbored. Some people do not view their children as human beings. They view them as assets to be liquidated when convenient. I nodded, running a finger along the base of my wine glass. They operated on the assumption that familial obligation was a leash they could pull whenever they required capital, I noted. They drained the college fund because they deemed Vanessa a superior investment. When that investment failed, they expected to cannibalize my success to cover the deficit. They mistook my previous silence for weakness. They did not understand that I was simply calculating the risk and waiting for the optimal moment to close the account. Marcus set his tablet face down on the table, joining the conversation. He approached the situation through the lens of a federal investigator dissecting the structural flaws of their conspiracy. Their arrogance was their primary vulnerability, Marcus stated, his analytical tone dissecting the past months. Criminals who operate in the white-collar sector often believe their wealth provides a cloak of invisibility. Bradley assumed he could use commercial real estate to launder syndicate cash without triggering federal oversight. Patricia assumed she could forge a notary seal and seize a corporation because she felt entitled to the revenue. They both failed to comprehend the digital footprint they were leaving behind. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the dining table. The cross-collateralization covenant you inserted into the loan agreement was the perfect mechanism. You did not have to hack their accounts or hire private investigators to ruin them. You simply handed them a contract, and their own blinding greed compelled them to sign away their sanctuary. They built their own gallows. You just provided the rope. The precision of his summary resonated deeply. The victory did not belong to a vindictive daughter seeking petty retribution. The victory belonged to a chief executive officer protecting her shareholders, her employees, and her own hard-earned legacy. I looked at the two men sitting at my table, David, who had offered unwavering emotional support, and Marcus, who had provided the tactical intelligence required to navigate a federal crisis. They were my true family. Loyalty is not a biological default. It is a conscious daily choice. It is the willingness to stand in the path of an advancing threat and hold the line. The media cycle surrounding the scandal had finally subsided. The sensational headlines detailing the fall of a local real estate dynasty were replaced by newer, more immediate controversies. Aegis Financial had absorbed the market turbulence and emerged with a reinforced reputation. Clients recognized that a firm capable of uncovering a sophisticated money laundering ring and defending against a hostile internal takeover was a firm they could trust with their most sensitive capital. My sister and her husband were currently navigating the harsh reality of the federal justice system. Their upcoming trial promised to be a swift, unforgiving process. Without the financial resources to secure elite legal defense, they were entirely at the mercy of prosecutors holding ironclad forensic evidence. The offshore gambling syndicate they attempted to appease had already moved on, severing all ties and leaving them to face the legal consequences alone. As for Richard and Patricia, they were experiencing the exact future they had prescribed for me. They were forced to be resourceful. They were forced to build a life from the ground up, devoid of luxury vehicles, country club memberships, and the stolen capital of their children. I picked up my glass and took a final sip of the rich, dark wine. The flavor was bold and uncompromising. I did not carry an ounce of regret. I did not mourn the loss of the parents who tried to destroy me. I felt the clear, unburdened relief of a survivor who had successfully navigated a minefield and reached the open horizon. I turned my attention away from the dining table, directing my final thoughts to anyone listening who might be standing in the shadows of a toxic lineage. Family is not an excuse for them to drain your life force. Being related to someone does not grant them a permanent, unconditional license to exploit your talent, drain your finances, or sabotage your future. If the people who share your genetic code view your success as a resource to be plundered, you owe them nothing. You do not owe them your capital, you do not owe them your time, and you certainly do not owe them your guilt. The sweetest revenge is not found in harming them. It is not found in screaming matches, physical altercations, or desperate attempts to force them to understand your pain. Toxic individuals thrive on your emotional exhaustion. The ultimate retaliation is removing your emotion from the equation entirely. You study the rules of the strong. You learn the mechanics of the systems that govern the world. You fortify your contracts, you secure your assets, and you build boundaries made of reinforced steel. You let them operate under the illusion of their own superiority. And when they inevitably overreach, driven by their own insatiable entitlement, you step aside and watch them incinerate their own empires. You use their greed to construct the very trap that ends their reign. Never surrender your hard-earned ground to appease people who would gladly watch you drown. You are the architect of your own survival. Claim your space, defend your perimeter, and let the predators starve outside your gates. Thank you for walking through this journey with me today. If you have ever had to outsmart the people who were supposed to protect you, if you have ever turned a trap into a triumph, let your voice be heard in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button and share this story to help others recognize their own power. Stay sharp, trust your instincts, and I will see you in the next story. The city of Chicago stretches out beneath my penthouse window, a sprawling grid of amber streetlights and silver high-rises. I stand in the quiet comfort of my dining room, the crystal stem of my wine glass resting between my fingers. The air up here is still. The frantic, desperate noise of my former family, the blackmail, the smear campaigns, the forged contracts has faded into the distant background. They are currently navigating the rigid bureaucracy of public assistance, learning the harsh mathematics of survival they once forced upon me. I watch the headlights trace lines across the interstate, reflecting on the decade and a half it took to reach this specific, unyielding peace. If you are standing in the wreckage of a toxic lineage, trying to determine your next move, I offer you 3 principles forged in this corporate fire. First, biological connection does not equate to infinite debt. Society enforces a dangerous narrative that you must tolerate abuse simply because the perpetrators share your last name. I reject that premise. A family title is not a license to plunder your resources or sabotage your future. True allegiance is demonstrated through mutual respect and protection, the kind David and Marcus offered without hesitation. If the people sharing your table view your success merely as a reservoir to fund their failures, you hold no moral obligation to sustain them. Evict the parasites. Protect your hard-earned ground. Second, emotional detachment is your sharpest weapon. Narcissistic individuals operate within a theater of chaos. They utilize public tears, rushed litigation, and character assassination to incite a panicked defensive reaction. Do not descend into their arena. When confronted with manipulation, retreat into silence and gather your data. A weeping mother on television may sway local opinion for a news cycle, but a forensic audit and an anachronistic notary seal will dictate the final judicial decree. Let your adversaries exhaust their energy on theatrics. You focus on the paper trail. Third, the architecture of true justice does not require you to strike the final blow. Arrogance creates a fatal cognitive blind spot. The most efficient way to neutralize a predator is to leverage their own insatiable greed against them. When you conceal a lethal consequence within a desperate bailout, their sense of entitlement prevents them from reading the fine print. You do not need to orchestrate their downfall. You simply provide the contract step back and allow their hubris to execute the terms. My name is Harper. I built an empire from the remnants of a stolen future, and I protect it with uncompromising precision. Thank you for sitting across the desk from me today. If you have ever had to rewrite the rules to survive a treacherous dynamic, drop your experience in the comments. Hit the like button and be sure to subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories so you never miss a blueprint for taking back control. Keep your ledgers clean, trust your data, and I will